It's good to be back, and I return with the first POV movie I've ever seen. POV, or point of view movies, some would argue aren't actually found footage, but I think it's the same concept where the audience is made part of the events, just taken much further. In a point of view movie, the entire film takes place from the literal perspective of a character, with the camera standing in for the character, sort of like watching gameplay from a streamer. And the very first movie I subject myself to this experience through is positively outrageously violent. A horror comedy short freely available on YouTube that I'm just gonna keep calling POV because that title is a mouthful. And that's what he said. That would have been a joke in this movie. POV plays out like gameplay in a zombie shooter, celebrating the juvenile comedy of tweens, gamers and let's players. Our nameless character wakes up unsure of what happened last night, only to find himself surrounded by pale, dehydrated weirdos wanting to kill him. And the film follows his progress through the hordes and hordes of loonies. It's a film without a plot that just ends at the first death, because in classic FPS spirit, the story doesn't matter. What matters is having a good time along the way, and boy is this movie a good time. If you just turned 13 and gay bashing still makes you giggle? That is the gist of comedy in this film, but there is more to it. For one, I like how the editing is the same as an old school arcade shooter, with the dude either awkwardly shuffling, staring or zooming across the landscape like a messed up toddler, coupled with absolutely awful voice acting. Even though all the characters speak English, all of their lines are dubbed over, so the lip movement never syncs up with what they're saying. And all of the blood spray and gunfire have been added in post, with the screen turning red and shaking whenever the character takes damage and the bloodstain slowly fading away after a few seconds. The whole thing really does come off like an early first-person shooter, and it is joyfully awkward and intentionally unintentionally funny. I just wish the jokes were funny as well. The dialogue comes across a little bit like abridged gameplay of Resident Evil, with mods and voiceover by homophobic incels. I'd say 80% of the jokes are all about how funny the PP is, with the man being horny as sin and having to find the home of military operations while running his mouth like a Let's Player on Xbox Live. I don't mind edgy jokes, but, and this is a key aspect of comedy, it has to be funny. Otherwise it just comes across as spiteful. Sure, humor is subjective, and I'm not an expert in comedy, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But being shocking and outrageous isn't all you need to be funny. It needs something to bounce off of. It needs contrast to make it unexpected and gross. I compare the film to abridged gameplay, but because it's an original film, there is no context to anything that's being said. You don't know what's really supposed to be said in every scene, so there is nothing to make the dialogue funny. If I continue the gameplay analogy, it does remind me of Let's Players mocking and laughing at the games they play, but let me lead you to revelation. Let's Players are the equivalent of sitcoms with a laughing track. When they laugh, you laugh, but you're not actually laughing at the joke, you're laughing with them. And I think that's the biggest failing of the film. Because it's so shallow, I'm given no reason to empathize with the main character, so nothing he says or does makes me laugh. POV is a well-executed, terrible joke. The best part for me was the direction, which accurately captured how stiff and floundering old-school arcade games are compared to today. It made me smile to see living people live out these scripted, somewhat random events like a parody of House of the Dead. But the juvenile humor and aimless story set it all back too far for me to recommend. I sentence positively outrageously violent to a 3 on a scale of 11.